Next up on the agenda, we have Dr. Walter Royal. He's from the University of Maryland Medical Center. He'll be doing a bit on neurosarcoidosis. Dr. Royal?
Okay, thank you very much, Ginger, and I should probably thank Dr. Brasington as well because he just gave me a nice segue into what I'm actually going to talk about. So I'm new to sarcoidosis treatment and research. You can see from what I have listed behind my name that I spent a lot of time doing MS. I actually heard somebody out there say something about Atlanta and Morehouse. I was there for 5 years before going to the University of Maryland. I was at the Neuroscience Center. But we have an MS center there that does a lot of clinical trials. And so we're starting a clinical trial looking at ACTH. And I could really appreciate the comments that Ginger made earlier because MS back in the 1940s was where sarcoidosis is now. As a matter of fact, there was somebody named Sylvia Lowry whose brother came down with MS, so she put an ad in the New York Times asking if anyone else had a family member or had the disease themselves and wanted to, jumpstart efforts to fund research. And today there are about 10 drugs to treat MS that slow the disease. There are drugs that can promote remyelination. We're starting to hear about therapies that are very effective in treating resistant disease. So I think that, what the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research is doing is really important, and I think we can look and hope for a very bright future. So these are my disclosures, and I'm not going to, there is going to be a talk that's really going to focus on neurosarcoidosis itself and the various manifestations and treatment, but let me just, since I'm up here, say that it is a relatively infrequent complication of systemic sarcoid, but about 5% of people with nervous system involvement by sarcoidosis have only the nervous system involved. And when we talk about the nervous system, we talk about the central nervous system, the peripheral nervous system, brain, spinal cord, peripheral nerves, and muscle, all part of the nervous system. And any of those areas can be affected alone or in combination. So again, you can have very different presentations and problems occurring in different people. And the symptoms that can occur are very varied as well. So how do you diagnose it? Well, certainly for neurosarcoidosis, you'd expect for the nervous system to be involved. And if you're lucky, well, you really do want to see the pathology that's characteristic for sarcoidosis affecting the nervous system. MRI scan, the next speaker is one of the world's experts in MRI. I'm just going to show this just to make the point that it is something that's used for diagnosis, as well as being able to look at a biopsy and seeing the granuloma there on the right, similar to what's found in lung. And you can even see that sort of pathology in the nerves of individuals who have the peripheral nervous system involved, and sometimes you can even do a biopsy of the white of the eye, the so-called conjunctiva, and make the diagnosis an easy way to reach the tissue. And granulomas form because of inflammation. I guess this has a pointer on it, is that correct? Maybe not. And the inflammation that occurs, as Dr. Brasington said, is really a coalescence of inflammatory cells coming together to form these granulomas, and they're very specific inflammatory cells called macrophages, T cells, some B cells, and the formation of the granuloma is not totally random. It's been characterized as occurring in certain stages, and as you can see from what's listed above that figure, that those various stages can involve different or some of the same inflammatory cells. And there's certain drugs that work better against some than others, so you can imagine that in thinking about what to treat sarcoidosis with, thank you. that thinking about drugs that can target these inflammatory cells might be a good idea. And that's what's being done, again, by using these anti-TNF agents that are available these days. What's been available over time, even Cytoxan tends to attack T cells a little bit better than macrophages. So there has been some specificity over time, but the older drugs tended to just go after everything, which is not necessarily a bad thing, because when a person has granuloma, the granulomas can be at any of those stages, not necessarily all of them synchronized into being at the same stage. And here's a list of examples of drugs that can be used. Dr. Brasington referred to some of those, and some of those that are more frequently used these days and being considered for treating neurosarcoidosis. So we're interested in the drug ACTH. And as you said earlier, ACTH has been around for a long time. Actually, just to skip ahead, well, the individuals who I guess they discovered it back in the 1940s, won the Nobel Prize. Essentially, it was purified from slaughtered pigs, from the brains, the pituitaries of slaughtered pigs, by people who were trying to find something similar to cortisone that could treat inflammatory disorders, rheumatoid arthritis. So this fellow, Dr. Hench at the Mayo Clinic, got together with the guys at the slaughter yards and was able to purify the compound and show that it was effective. And he and the person who helped characterize that, two people were awarded the Nobel Prize for that. And very quickly after that discovery, a long list of inflammatory disorders were approved as being good to treat using the drug. The FDA quickly went ahead and approved them. And one of them was sarcoidosis. And this was done back in the day before you had to do clinical trials. These days you have to be very careful about these drugs. But it seemed pretty benign. And so it's been around for a long time for treating sarcoid. But unfortunately, so far, a really good clinical trial has not been done. It has been shown to be effective for treating some other disorders. There's a type of seizure called infantile spasms, where usually in a child less than a year old, you see them suddenly have a seizure whereby they just flex, almost bend in half like a jackknife, and then they relax again. Very debilitating disorder. Certain type of kidney disorder called nephrotic syndrome. It's actually been used in MS, and we tend to see it be effective in treating patients who no longer respond to steroids. And I'll say something as to why that's the case and why we're looking at it in sarcoidosis. It is an expensive drug. That's the one drawback. One vial costs $28,000. You can get multiple treatments out of that vial, but that's been an issue, and we'll see how that goes as time goes on, as far as the cost is concerned. There are some side effects, like with any drug. There's a condition called Cushing syndrome that people develop if they take high doses of steroids for a long time. It turns out the first description of Cushing syndrome involved a patient who had a tumor in the pituitary that produced persistent large amounts of ACTH. Of course, in treating patients with this drug, you can control how much you're getting, so one could theoretically avoid that sort of occurrence. And actually, these symptoms of Cushing syndrome that you can see with high doses of steroids tend to be less prominent with treatment with ACTH. So again, it's made by a certain part of the brain and secreted, goes into circulation and off to various parts of the body. So what's been done is that compound, that protein ACTH, is now synthesized and available, so that it is the case that it's injected and one can see some of the same effects. And it turns out that the protein itself, when it goes off to do its thing in various parts of the body, it's broken down to a number of other different proteins that have overlapping effects. So you're getting a lot of bang for your buck out of just one protein. You're not just getting one doing one thing. You're getting multiple doing similar things, some which have effects on certain parts of the body, others on others. And they're able to do that because they bind proteins produced by cells and expressed on the surface of cells called receptors. And there are 5 different receptors for the various fragments that are produced by that protein. And these receptors are in different parts of the body. Some cells produce them, some don't, some produce others, so that you can get a very diverse effect from the drug. And you know, sarcoid is a diverse disease. It really does affect every part of the body. So sounds like I'm sort of a drug salesman up here, but there's a chance that you can see this drug being able to go off and very specifically target some tissues and some organs that are affected by sarcoidosis, something that, of course, we're going to be looking at with respect to the nervous system. And this just makes that point again, illustrating the various cells, including immune cells, that can be targeted by this drug. And again, those immune cells are some of the same that tend to populate granulomas that occur in various parts of the body. Turns out sarcoidosis is made by the brain. It has effects in the brain itself to keep your brain healthy. And actually, we know that the brain itself puts out signals and messages and molecules that can impact the immune system, the function of the immune system. And it looks like ACTH can be involved in that as well. So putting it all together, we get this protein produced in the brain, has effects inside and outside the brain, which the bottom line for sarcoidosis can impact disease, potentially impact disease activity. And that occurs by very specific mechanisms. So just to say something about our trial, it is a pilot study. At this time, we're going to be looking at a small number of patients. We believe that treatment with ACTH or ACTH will result in improvement and long-term stabilization in people with CNS sarcoidosis. We expect to see effects on clinical disease activity, improvement on MRI scans, that people will have an improved quality of life. And these are things that we hypothesize because these are outcomes that you really must see in a clinical trial if you're going to say that a drug is effective. So might as well throw it out there as a hypothesis. And in that context, we expect to see some specific effects on immune abnormalities that are present in blood as well as in spinal fluid. So our patients are going to be getting regular spinal taps. Very important. It's going to be very informative. So for this trial, we're enrolling individuals with confirmed diagnosis of sarcoidosis who have a disease that's limited to the nervous system. Again, that's about 5% of individuals, which sounds like, and it is a very small number. However, that being said, the University of Maryland, just like here at WashU St. Louis, is a referral center, and you'd be surprised as to how many patients are actually referred in with that diagnosis. So we see a decent number of patients, actually a large number of patients with neurosarcoidosis, and we expect to be able to fill this trial. We would want to enroll patients who are not doing well on their current treatment. So some evidence of clinical deterioration, we'll add this drug to what they're already getting and see if they can improve from there. Again, these are some of the assessments that will be done. This is the dose that we'll be using. All of this information is available on the clinicaltrials.gov website. Here's my contact information. I take it you have some other information for how to reach me as well. Please, if you have any questions, if your physicians have any questions, if we're lucky, we'd be able to expand the study so that we can get more people in. We're hoping to see some positive results. Thank you. Thank you.
I forgot my agenda.